guest today is Sarah Bianchi. She has nearly 30 years' experience in both the private and public sectors. She most recently served as Deputy US Trade Representative between 2021 and 2024. She's currently Senior Managing Director at Evercore, an investment banking firm. Sarah, thanks so much for joining me today. We're speaking in a week where President Biden has announced increased tariffs on a select number of Chinese imports. Most prominently electric vehicles. He's raising the tariff to 100%, but he's also increasing tariffs on lithium-ion batteries as well as critical minerals that go into those batteries. Having worked with Biden for a long time, a long part of your career, what can you tell us about what he's trying to achieve with these tariffs?
Sure. Thanks for having me. The way that I think President Biden is thinking about this is putting tariffs on a number of strategic initiatives where, first of all, he has passed through the Congress a number of investments in these areas through the Inflation Reduction Act and has a big commitment to helping to build a domestic industry and working with allies as well. So the tariffs that you saw were on strategic places for the clean energy transition, as you mentioned, batteries, minerals. There were also some other areas that he views as strategic, like semiconductors. So that's his approach on tariffs.
And a lot of people would say, well, this is an effective ban on imports of Chinese EVs. Why not allow some competition to spur US automakers to press forward with electric vehicles? Why go for such a strict outright ban?
Well, I think the president is concerned on a couple fronts. First, we have not seen in this space really fair competition from China. It's been a lot of non-market practices and policies that have driven these vehicles to be where they're at, and so. Lots of times we tariff things in that regard. The administration, I think, is also rightfully concerned about some of the data security issues and national security issues. They have another, what they're calling a connected car initiative to look at what kind of exposure. These are very high-tech vehicles. Many of them have and will have radars that could look into far out, including to military bases. So I think there's a lot that the United States needs to understand before opening this market up more broadly.
That's good. So when you look at Biden's signature achievement, I guess the Inflation Reduction Act, the subsidies involved in that, the requirements for local or production from friendly countries. How do you see the tariffs working alongside those subsidies?
Well, they're designed to be complementary. They are designed to have an approach where we are trying to create an industry in this country and more globally with a lot of our allies and partners. And we're not where we need to be in this industry. And so some of these incentives are designed to help bolster and catch us up, and the tariffs are complementary that make it so that we're not flooded with a set of imports that make that more difficult.
But has Biden given enough time, for instance, in areas where China is extremely dominant, such as graphite, he's given until 2026? Because is that really enough time for a supply chain outside of China to be built up?
Well, there's always a tension in terms of deployment versus what the supply chain is ready to do. 2 years was the number that many in the industry asked for, and that I think felt comfortable. He also does want to keep the incentives and motivation quite strong to get the industry going domestically and in other places. So we're seeking to strike a balance here as a country, and I guess time will tell as to whether that's the right balance. There's always ways to accommodate it going forward if it's not.
And talking about Chinese overcapacity, Biden said in his statement, China's flooding the global markets with artificially low-priced exports. But we've seen reaction from Xi Jinping and from other Chinese officials saying there's no such thing as overcapacity. And in fact, for the green transition, we're going to need all of these products. Do you see any sense that China will change its practices, or are we locked in, locked in a struggle now going forwards?
Well, Secretary Yellen, who I think is a very esteemed and fair economist in her own right, has drawn that conclusion that there is a lot of overcapacity, and that's drawn from weaknesses in the Chinese economy and ways that they're attempting to deal with that. And I think she's pretty fair-minded in this regard, not an ideologue, and so I think there are a lot of concerns going forward about having fair and functioning markets. But, I don't think it's particularly surprising that that was the response from Chinese leadership. I don't think anybody expected that he would agree with the analysis.
Got it. And in terms of, it'd be great to hear about your experience in government as deputy trade representative. How much was the energy transition, the critical mineral supply chain, how much did that feature as part of trade negotiations?
Oh, it was absolutely central. I mean, for lots of my time there, the Inflation Reduction Act had just passed, and countries were trying to assess what it meant for them. We worked a lot with allies and partners, including Korea, including Japan, to make sure that, legislating in any country is never, it's an art, not a science. And so there's never going to be provisions that are 100% workable for everyone. And so you always have to spend time working with partners and allies and industry and stakeholders to really understand some of the implications. So we spent a lot of time doing that. And quite frankly, I think President Biden is thrilled with the amount of investment and manufacturing. And this really has unleashed a new moment, I think, in this industry. And that's what it was intended to do.
And what do you think about the requirement in the IRA that if you have a free trade agreement with the US, you become eligible for this, for that material becomes eligible for subsidies? I mean, that leaves out a lot of countries, right? Democratic Republic of Congo, Argentina, Indonesia. Do you think that was the wrong approach?
Well, I understand what the legislators were trying to do, which is to try to open the market up to a set of allies and partners, and while also leaving incentives to develop a robust industry here at home. FTAs, it is a bit of an arbitrary standard for a lot of historic and idiosyncratic reasons. We have free trade agreements with some countries and not others, even if though others might have a very close relationship with the United States. So like all legislative provisions, it was a bit inelegant, and we've tried to work to correct that as a country, particularly with Japan as one example. So if I were writing in an ideal world a set of exact countries, I'm not sure FTA would be the perfect demarcation, but that's something that policymakers will have to work through as implementation evolves and we see what makes the most sense.
And when Vice President Kamala Harris visited Indonesia, she talked about the potential for a critical mineral specific free trade agreement. Do you think that is something the US should do with Indonesia, given concerns about labor standards and the dominance of Chinese investment in Indonesia?
Well, I think that a critical minerals agreement with Indonesia would have to be very carefully structured. And that was a conversation that I had with my Indonesian counterparts before President Jokowi visited the United States. And the United States and Indonesia put forward a statement leaning into the possibility for that. But I think the United States was very clear that it would have to have both high labor and high environmental standards and accountability. So there are some, as you know, mines in Indonesia that are quite high quality, and I think there's a lot of potential. And I do think there are many in the Indonesian government who are looking for an opportunity to raise some of the standards. So I think there is a possibility that you could work forward, but it would be different than the other critical minerals agreements that the United States has looked at, both because Indonesia has many more minerals than some of the places we've been looking at a critical minerals agreement, but also because of the labor and environment concerns, it would have to be a different structure.
So what kind of different structure could it be? I mean, how to take account of those environmental and labor concerns?
Well, I think one of the things that trade is going to have to start to incorporate and look at is how to be a bit more granular on some of these environmental and labor provisions. They are not really, to date, equipped to deal with things really relevant to mine. So lots of times trade agreements have more vague environmental standards, or just even things that are more specific to other issues and not mining. But I think at a minimum, you would want an agreement that made sure the mines weren't doing certain environmental practices like tailing and other things that I think are pretty well agreed to in the industry that aren't good for the environment. So I think you'd have to get quite granular in the agreement.
And what about Argentina? Obviously, a big lithium producer, again, with a lot of Chinese investment. New government in Argentina, do you think there's potential for a deal there as well?
That wasn't quite as high on the minds of the stakeholders that we talked to. I think in the short term, at least, they felt a little bit more comfortable with where their lithium supply was going to. But as this law unfolds and comes into more later in its implementation stage, I think there's going to be a lot of questions. And I think our lawmakers here in the United States, who I think understandably on its face have concerns about some of these agreements, I think as they start to learn about this market and really what it means for IRA and for achieving the goals that we're trying to, there'll be flexibility and modification. And that's what you always see with legislation, whether it's the Affordable Care Act or other provisions. It is hard to get something 100% right on the first go around, particularly in a developing industry like this one is in the United States.
Interesting. And how worried are you about, the IRA has its provisions of the foreign entity of concern. They've recently come out and defined those, but there's always room for Chinese companies to find ways around these kind of provisions. How worried are you that joint companies will be formed where the equity split is adjusted, or there are many ways to get around? How worried are you about Chinese supply coming in, if you like, through the back door, or finding ways around the legislation?
Well, that's always something that you have to worry about, particularly in a global marketplace like we have. It's an issue around electric vehicles. Now, oftentimes we have seen, for example, in export controls in and around semiconductors, the United States government put out a policy, and then it appeared that there were too many workarounds that they weren't comfortable with, so they modified the policy. That's always a possibility, but I think they're trying to strike the right balance in the administration between deployment goals and foreign entity of concern, and I think for now the balance that was struck was a good start.
And what do you think about Chinese companies investing in the US? Or licensing deals between, we've seen CATL, battery producer, and Ford, and others potentially in the line. Is that not a better solution, that the Chinese companies come and actually build in the US with US workers and potentially train US workers and also license the technology?
I think there are real possibilities there. I do think that we need to understand that there's some parts of this industry where China does have some technology that others could learn and benefit from. And so I think right now, from what I'm seeing, that the balance is right. And certainly we always want investment in the United States, and we've certainly seen that from the IRA. Again, I think there are questions, as this market unfolds, to the degree there are security concerns or other areas. Sometimes that's the case. It's something I think policymakers will have to keep an eye on. But right now, again, I think for an opening salvo, I think they've struck the right balance.
Got it. And the IRA, as you said, aims to friendshore, create a network of allies and supply chains in these allied countries. But in fact, from where I am in Europe, I guess we've seen a lot of investment go to the US that potentially could have been in Europe. How do you, if everyone's doing their own industrial policy, but some countries don't have the resources the US have, how do you make sure everyone can benefit from this, clean energy transition?
Well, it's a really great point, and it is something that at the United States Trade Representative office we thought a lot about in the wake of the Inflation Reduction Act. I think we did hear a lot of concerns from allies and partners. There were places where we tried to address them outright. With critical minerals agreements and other provisions. But on balance, I think what President Biden would say is we all need to be investing in this transition. The more the better, the faster the better. Europe in many ways is ahead of the United States in terms of EV deployment and some other areas. So I think we were looking in this country to catch up quite quickly.
So was the backlash quite significant that the IRA received when you were in government?
I think countries were concerned. They hadn't seen the United States put forward something as ambitious and bold, and I think that it was clear from the beginning that it would have its intended effect in terms of battery manufacturers and others investing in the United States. I think President Biden is comfortable that was part of its intent, but certainly it was a very bold, somewhat industrial policy that is not like a lot of what has been seen in the United States lately. And so working it through with our allies and partners was certainly an important component. And but again, as I said, when you have a big, important piece of legislation like that, that's really always the case, right? There's always iterations and regulations trying to address all the different components. And so there certainly was a reaction, and certainly a lot of issues to work through, but I don't think that's anything that we wouldn't have expected.
And could you be interested to hear can you articulate for us, why and how the Biden administration, this fundamental rethinking of the role of trade and government, which, Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor, has also talked about, where the US obviously traditionally pro-free markets, pro-limited role for government, to embracing real heavy government involvement, heavy government direction in these strategic industries. What changed? Was it the experience of COVID? How did that change in thinking come about?
Interestingly, I first started working for then Vice President Biden in 2011. And he used to talk about a lot of these themes and issues even then. We, at that time, traveled throughout the Midwest and really saw what was going on there. And I think his fundamental outlook was very optimistic about the American worker and American manufacturing. And he really did always wanted to make sure that jobs were coming there. And he likes to talk about the American worker and how nobody should bet against them. And so it is not surprising to me, even from that work, that this was a big emphasis of the Biden administration. That's from the president, period, end of story. But I think certainly the COVID supply chains brought to light some of the challenges with having an overdependence on any one place. And certainly the enhanced tensions between the United States and China made it clear that it was important to have, particularly in these industries that are really going to drive our future, our own capacity and industry here at home.
But do you worry that without Chinese competition or Chinese supply of minerals and batteries, that could end up delaying the energy transition in the US, delaying or slowing down sales of electric vehicles, which wouldn't achieve what Biden wants as well, right? Do you think he is getting the right balance?
I think it's something that is going to be worth watching over time. I think that to date we are seeing, in response to the legislation, some of the investments that are very much in the interest of the United States, again, battery manufacturers and the like. I think the critical mineral supply chain is responding to a lot of things right now, the rise in EVs. globally, the need for some of these minerals in other high-tech areas, the phones we use, all of that. So I don't know precisely where that will land, but there's always an opportunity to adjust down the line if needed. And I think it's very important to continue to send the signal to the investment community that you're very serious about friendshoring, and I think you are seeing the market again respond to that. And so I think that's all healthy, but I'm not positive that in 2025 or 2026 the United States government won't make tweaks on what they have set out to do at this point.
And I guess you mentioned investors, but investors need policy certainty. What are your thoughts about what happens if Trump wins the White House? Would he be able to gut or remove some of the IRA? What do you think, or will he continue it?
Very unusual for policymakers to want to get in the way of investments that are going on in their states. So we think the IRA, the core provisions stay. That doesn't mean that there isn't a lot of difference in regulation. In Evercore, we work with clean energy companies and market participants all the time. And I think they are trying to get their handle around what might a tighter FEOC provision in 30D look like? What could it mean for the 45X? Again, an area where we think there would be a little bit more certainty, but it's always relevant for investors and participants to think about what these changes could mean, because certainly from a deployment perspective, it could be quite profound.
And presumably, the Department of Energy, he could quite easily stop all those grants and loans that are going out, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, there are. Directionally, governments like to put money out that they have. And so I'm not sure that I think the entire deployment funds would go away. I think it's more of an issue of particular regulations, like you saw with the graphite 2-year exemption from the Biden administration, like you saw with FEOC requirements that do allow for some relationship with Chinese companies. That kind of thing you could tighten quite profoundly and make it very, very difficult for anybody to have 30D eligibility.
Interesting. And there are some people who talk about replicating Europe's carbon border adjustment mechanism. And John Podesta, the White House climate advisor, gave a fascinating speech recently about we need to account for the embodied carbon emissions of global trade. Do you think there is support in the US for doing something like that, similar to Europe?
Yeah, so interestingly, I was at that speech. I'm involved with the Columbia University Energy group, and I spoke there myself. So I thought it was really interesting. I think he is pointing to an issue that, yes, the United States does need to grapple with going forward. I think he's doing some signal setting about the kinds of conversations a second Biden term would want to be having with allies and partners and stakeholders. So I thought it was an interesting speech, and I do think is something that needs to have, at least if nothing else, a full-throated conversation here in the States.
And would that allow US companies to be, to compete against China if you account for, I guess, a lot of the emissions that Chinese production has?
Potentially, there's a lot of design and implementation issues to think through. Lots of different ways that countries are thinking about it, but I think certainly here in the States, watching Europe and how that evolves. And again, I do definitely think a conversation that is well worth having here in Washington.
I want to ask about, you've done some research about the tax credit market, right? Coming out of the IRA. I believe I saw something you published. Could you talk about the potential for that, right? In the sense that you can transfer those tax credits, right?
Yeah, so we're very bullish here at Evercore for our clients and companies about 45X and other transferable credits. And when the Treasury Department recently put out their final regulations, we did some estimates to try and size that market. And we found that their potential of $47 billion this year, that has of credits that have the potential to be transferred. That doesn't mean they all will, and that market grows to 100 billion in a few years by our estimates. So we think it's a really exciting market. We think that lots of companies should pay attention to how they might avail themselves of it to whether it is to reduce their tax liability or to finance future investments. And so we're really excited to work with companies, both buyers and sellers, who are interested in this market to help them see if this is available, because I think it is a really unique tool, much more flexible than most tax policy we see in this space, and a really interesting tool for all those in the industry, those in corporate America to think about how this might not only help their tax needs, but their financing needs, and also for some of the buyers, their clean energy goals.
When you talk about financing, I mean, we have had a very tough financing environment due to low commodity prices and low prices for a lot of battery minerals. In a way, you've got this great policy from the IRA, etc., but you still need to raise the funds. What are you seeing from your clients and others now in terms of that financing environment?
Well, you're right to say that the financing environment has not been ideal in this space. There's a lot of, first of all, I think a lot of investors and companies are getting used to this space. It's not something that we've seen in this kind of a dramatic way. That's why we think that selling the tax credit is a really good option for sellers, because it actually, in some ways, is a financing mechanism. And if you can sell off, and some of these companies are going to have quite sizable credits in the tens and hundreds of millions of dollars, and if they can sell that to a corporate or a financial institution, then they are going to have more liquidity. And I think from the buyer side, it is going to be a way that they are more comfortable than those who aren't ready to finance the industry, but they are willing to take a tax credit that has a pretty stable set of rules and guarantees from the government. So I think it's a really interesting way to put more liquidity into this market while hopefully the financing market improves. And that's what we would encourage, a lot of the companies that you all work with to just at least take a look and think about it. And we're working with companies too, because I think there can be some really interesting transactions.
I mean, just simplistically, how does it work? Because it sounds quite confusing on the face of it. So you get a tax credit through the IRA and you can just transfer that to someone else.
Yeah, so they're different. It depends on what you're producing, whether it's batteries or hydrogen but there is quite a generous credit for production. There's an investment one too, but I think we're slightly more focused on the production one. And then, you can size what that credit would be. And then there are a set of rules that allow you to sell that off. And we're seeing some pretty healthy margins and pricing in the market. So people selling in the 90 cents range for at least some of the simpler certain transactions. Some of the credits are a bit easier than others. 45X is certainly one that we think has some less requirements and is a bit easier. But then you can sell that to a buyer or corporate or whatever else, and kind of get a liquidity. For some of the provisions, you can get direct pay from the Treasury Department as well. That's a little bit more of a lag delay in terms of when you actually get paid out. But for those who are producing things now in this country, there's quite generous credits available. And again, if you can sell it at any price, I think really can help your liquidity.
How successful do you think Biden's been in terms of reorienting the EV supply chain, the battery supply chain away from China? And where do you think we'll be in a couple of years, let's say by 2026?
Well, I think there's parts of the market that have been enormously successful. So the investment of that, the number of battery manufacturing companies that are partnering with OEMs here, building massive factories. I think that part of the supply chain I'm quite bullish on. I think some of the issues that you alluded to in minerals and parts of it that the United States is not quite as far along on are parts of this market that we're going to have to to watch. And we may not have all the tools in place yet to get where the United States is hoping to go. So my guess is there will be bumps along the way in implementation. Like I said, there always is. And then, of course, as you mentioned, we have a big election in November, and that in itself, I think, is causing a bit of anxiety in parts of this supply chain as they worry about what that might mean. And then, that could, if there is a change of government, certainly take folks a while to get some certainty about what some of these rules and risks might look like that going forward. And so there is a lot of uncertainty. There is a lot, I think, that will need to be tweaked along the way because, again, this is a new and evolving market. But I think in terms of the investment in factories in the U.S., I can't imagine the president is anything but pleased.
So we shouldn't see the announcement this week as just a vote winner or trying to win over union auto workers. You think it's all part of this planned strategy from Biden?
I absolutely think that the Biden administration is taking a very coordinated approach to this issue. They are looking at how these issues, whether it's export controls, tariffs, investments, how they all work together. I think there is enormous concern, not just in the United States, but globally about the Chinese EV market. And so it's not surprising to me that you saw a profound announcement there. If you talk to OEMs around the world, I think you will sense some anxiety. So it's not surprising. So I don't see it as just politics. This is a review that's been going on for a period of time, and getting this market right is hard. And so I just see it as an extension of that.
And during your time as Deputy US Trade Representative, you're also responsible for Africa. What's your view on how the US and Africa can increase trade, especially critical mineral trade?
At USTR, did a lot of, yes, I oversaw Asia and Africa. And Africa, as you know, has some great critical mineral resources. And there's a lot of efforts on the government, United States government, to try and help develop some of those. Again, we don't have the free trade agreements in place right now. So you're seeing a bit more of that activity coming out of the State Department, out of the Development Finance Corporation. But there's a lot of potential there. I think there's a lot of interest in African countries about partnering. That is one thing I would point out. I think when you go to the countries around the world, Indonesia, to be an example, African countries, they really are interested in these partnerships with the United States. And so that's a good sign.
Is that because they don't want to be totally reliant on China, right?
They don't. They absolutely don't. And so there's a lot of opportunity. And I just hope that our political system enables us to move as fast as I think we need to make this transition all that it can be. And that's always a hard part in government. But I think you see that across the globe. Like I said, in Indonesia, saw a lot of interest and willingness in terms of improving environmental standards. So I think the partnerships are there. And again, legislation is never perfect. So there are potentially changes that the legislators or the executive branch may need to think of along the way. But I think there's a lot of excitement. I think the Inflation Reduction Act, if nothing else, took the conversation to a whole new level. And that's a good sign in its own right, no matter where in the globe you are.
And could there be a US-EU deal on critical minerals? I think we haven't seen that yet, but do you think it's coming soon?
I think that is a challenging one, only because the EU itself has so many different stakeholders in the within the EU, and they have a set of interests. And I think the United States is rightly driving a hard bargain on legislation. On high standards. So I don't actually expect that one to be out the door in the near term. I could be wrong. I'd be delighted to be wrong, but it seemed to be to have hit a few hit a few sticky points.
But what you're saying basically is that you expect that if there is Chinese evasion of FEOC or other provisions from FTA countries, let's say Morocco or other countries, you expect there could be more revisions, right, further down the line.
I think that this is a market that that we have a big piece of legislation now, and a lot of policymakers who did a lot of work to get rules out and certainty as best they can. But generally, when you have a big piece of legislation like this that has so many global implications, it is not unusual to see tweaks and fixes either through the regulatory process or the legislative process along the way. And it would not surprise me if there were places that we saw that going forward.
Got it. Well, thanks so much, Sarah. Really great to have you here today.
Well, really enjoyed it, and a big fan of Benchmark and all the work that you all do in this space. And again, our clients at Evercore are super interested in this transition, both from an investment perspective, from a market perspective. So we're always glad to have the conversation.